Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a reading wrap-up of the first 2 months of the summer. So this will be my wrap-up of books that I read in June and July, excluding BookTube prize books and Book Naturalist book club books, because I've already done reviews of those. So yeah, I haven't done a wrap-up in a while, so I figured why not take this opportunity to talk about sort of my summer reading. And so let's just get into it because I have a lot of books to talk about. The first book I want to talk about that I read is Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This is a graphic novel series following Nick and Charlie, who are a high school couple. And we follow their relationship over the course of the 5 books. In Volume 5, they're getting older. They're dealing with, whether or not to have sex. They are dealing with the fact that one of them is going to have to go off to college because he's graduating from high school. So yeah, there's a lot of big topics for Nick and Charlie to deal with. I really love this series. It's very heartwarming. I highly recommend it if you like graphic novels. The second book is A Traitor to Memory by Elizabeth George. This is a mystery series that I've been buddy reading with Britta Bowler. This is book number 11 in the series, so, this has been going on for a while now. This follows Detective Lindley and his partner, Barbara Havers, as they try to solve a mystery involving a hit and run of a woman. And this woman may or may not be connected with a very famous violinist who has recently been unable to play his violin. And so the whole book is sort of dealing with how are these two people connected. A lot of the storyline is told from the violinist's personal diary that he's keeping as a part of his therapy, trying to deal with why he can't play the violin any longer. It is a chunker of a book, but I continue to really enjoy this mystery series set in England in the late 90s. Let's see. Number 3 is a memoir that I buddy read with Joe Smith. This is Knife, Meditations After an Attempted Murder by Salman Rushdie. I've read, sorry, a little bug flying around here. I've read a couple Salman Rushdie books at this point, and I really like his nonfiction writing. I think he's quite an interesting author in the area of nonfiction. He gets off on these tangents about pop culture and history, music, art, those sorts of things that I find quite endearing. This book is really good. It's got those trademark digressions, but he is really meditating on what it's like to be hated so much that somebody would attack you, what that has meant to his life, having a fatwa declared on him. But specifically about this episode where he was attacked by somebody with a knife, and he could have easily died. He was very injured. He lost his eye. So this is a big turning point in his life. Also, right before this happens, he has gotten married again for, I think, the 3rd time maybe, and he's weirdly obsessed with his wife, who is much younger than him. He's in his 70s and she's in her 30s, I think. But he, in every book that I've read by him, every nonfiction that I've read by him, he has been weirdly obsessed with the women he is with at the time. So I don't think that's a little weird. I don't think that's unusual for him. Let's put it that way. So overall, I enjoyed this. There was a chapter where he tries to get in the head of his attacker by imagining a conversation with this person. And I did not care for that as much as I did the rest of the book. But the rest of the book I thought was very thoughtful and interesting, and says a lot about our society today. Number 4 is another buddy reading experience. This is Committed on Meaning and Madwomen by Suzanne Scanlan. I buddy read this with Sean Breed's books, and this is a memoir of a young woman. Well, she's not a young woman anymore, but this is a memoir from a woman who was committed to a mental health institution when she was in her early 20s, in college. She was in college the same time period I was in college, in the early 90s. And so I found that quite interesting to read her reflections of that time and place, and how society thought about mental health issues, especially in how young women with mental health issues were treated. And this book also delves into what reading and writing means to her as a means of her dealing with her mental illnesses, and how important reading has been to her in her life. There's a lot in here about different books that really pulled her through really tough times in her life. I loved that part of it. And this also looks at how women throughout history have been viewed as being quote unquote crazy whenever they have, whenever women speak out or act in a way that the greater society deems to be unruly, they're often determined to be mentally ill and put away for that. That happened a lot throughout history, and she's reflecting on that as well. I thought this was really thoughtful, gave me a lot to chew on, and I really enjoyed my time spent with it. I would definitely recommend this one. I then finished a book that I had started back during the month of May for Springathon, and that is this memoir, We Took to the Woods by Louise Dickinson Rich. This is a classic work about the Maine outdoors and about living in the wilderness in Maine. In this book, the author details her time moving to a very remote area of Western Maine with her family, her husband, and their young child, and living in this very rough environment, and how what that was like, the day-to-day things that you had to do to survive, what it was like to be in this part of Maine away from basically civilization. Very interesting. This was the time period when they were still floating logs down the lakes and rivers to the sea for timber industry. It was just at the end of that time period because of course, it's in the 1930s, and so there's gas-powered engines, and there's steam-powered engines, and coal-powered engines, and all that sort of thing. So that time period is ending, and they were like in the woods at that last stage of that type of industry, and that's very interesting. It's also very interesting just what it took to survive. And she really loved this lifestyle that they had, but it's fascinating to read about. She also writes with a lot of humor. There's a lot of funny animal anecdotes in here, and I very much enjoyed my time spent with this book. I finished next this nonfiction, Looking for Miss America, A Pageant's 100-Year Quest to Define Womanhood by Margot Mifflin. I first heard about this book from Doris over at Aldi Books. She read it a few years ago and really enjoyed it. So I've been wanting to read it ever since then. And I picked this one up in June, and Buddy read it with my friend Rachel. And we both really enjoyed our time spent with this. This is written by a journalist, and it details the history of the Miss America pageant, not to be confused with the Miss USA pageant, which is the one that's owned by, or was owned by, Donald Trump. This is the other the other beauty pageant. And so it details the history of this pageant from the early part of the 1900s all the way up to the present time, and how the pageant has evolved and changed over those time periods, what it has meant to women, how women have been viewed by the greater society that participate in these types of things, the fact that the pageant was basically exclusive to white women for a very, very long portion of its history. I think it wasn't until 1970 that women of color were allowed to participate in it. So there's that whole side of it, the history of it, and there's the feminist side of it. There's the side of it that, these types of pageants were a way out of poverty for a lot of young women in America. There was educational opportunities, scholarships available if you won them. And so there were reasons why women participated in this beyond, wanting to, show off their legs in a swimsuit kind of thing. And I thought this wasn't the best written book I've ever read, but it was super interesting and very engaging and kept me wanting to find out what was going to happen next, because I didn't know very much about the history of the Miss America pageant. The next book I completed was a romance novel, and that was A Night to Surrender by Tessa Dare. This is book 1 in the Spindle Cove series, historical fiction, historical romance, I should say. It takes place in the time, like early 1800s. The Napoleonic Wars are happening, and it involves a young woman named Suzanne, who is, she has basically created a haven for unwanted women in society in this little village on the at the seaside, and all of a sudden this military guy shows up in the area. He is recovering from having been wounded on the continent, and he has been charged with forming a militia in her community, and of course sparks fly, and they have to figure out how to deal with one another because their goals and aims for the village are very different. It's quite funny. It's really charming. There are funny animals. There are funny side characters. It was a good time. I buddy read that with my romance reading buddies, Doris and Katie. The next book I completed was a reread. This is The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is book 3 in the Lord of the Rings series. I buddy read the whole series this year with Doris and Kim from Middle of the Book March. I love J.R.R. Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings series is on my top 10 books of lists, top 10 of books that I have read in my lifetime. I love these books. I've read them many, many times over the years. That's never going to change. I just absolutely think that these are classic and some of the most engaging storytelling that I have ever read in my life. And I absolutely love it. And I love these movie tie-in covers because Aragorn, I mean, enough said right there. The next book I finished was another nonfiction. This is The Johnstown Flood, the incredible story behind one of the most devastating disasters America has ever known by David McCullough. I plan to read all of the books David McCullough has ever written. I love his way that he writes about history, and this one was no exception. I actually listened to this on audiobook and completed the whole thing in one day. I had a lot of driving to do for work one day, and I started this book and finished it in the same day. This is all about a disaster that happened in 1889 at the end of May, like May 31st, 1889. And it was a preventable disaster. A dam had been created on this river system solely to create a fishing opportunity for wealthy white people, wealthy white men. And this dam was not maintained properly over the decades, and people knew that it could fail, and it does fail on May 31st, 1889, and it takes out the downstream communities below the dam, one of which was Johnstown, and more than 2,000 people died in this disaster. It wiped out entire communities. And the thing that's really hard to take about it is how preventable it was. Like, this could have been avoided if people had only done the right thing. So that was a frustrating thing to read about, but the way that McCullough writes about it, it's very exciting. And like, even though you know what's going to happen in the end, like, it still is kind of a page turner, to be honest. So really enjoyed my time with that one. I next picked up a book off my ancient TBR, and that was this urban fantasy, Silence Fallen, which is book number 10 in the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. I don't know why I let this one sit on my stack for 5 years because I absolutely loved my time spent with this book. Mercy Thompson is a shapeshifter, and in her world, she is married to the leader of the local werewolf pack, and there are vampires, and there are witches, and there are other types of magical creatures, and Mercy is always getting herself into scrapes. But the thing that I love about her is she's very real and down to earth, and she's stronger than she thinks, and she is not afraid to like stand up for what she believes in and stand up for the people that she loves. And she is a kick-ass heroine. She just is awesome. I love her so much. And these are really, really well written. I would definitely recommend the whole series to you. Please start with book 1, which is, I can't remember what book 1 is. Why can I not remember it? It just totally went out of my head. So I'm going to look it up for you. Mooncalled. Mooncalled is book 1 in the series. I will say, look up trigger warnings for the series if you plan to start this, because they're not necessarily in that first book, but throughout the series, there are some bad things that happen to Mercy and to other people in the series who you become close with. So just, if you have some things that you don't like to read about, just take a look at those before you get started. But I really love them. I really love Mercy Thompson as a character, and I think she's great, and I think this whole series is really great. The next book I finished was a literary fiction. This is Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. This is the second book that he's published. The first one was Night of the Living Res, which is a short story collection, which I read and absolutely loved. I loved that book. I buddy read that with Sean Breathes Books, and we buddy read this together as well. And I will say I really did enjoy this book. I liked it a lot. I didn't love it as much as Night of the Living Res, but I thought this was a very well done book. This is a follows our narrator, Charles, who is probably in his 40s. He's a white man. He lives on the opposite side of the Penobscot River from the Penobscot Reservation, where the indigenous tribe lives. And he sort of watches this house that his ex lives in with her new husband and their daughter. And turns out that the daughter is actually Charles's daughter. And at some point when his girlfriend gets pregnant, she decides that she needs to be with an indigenous man so that she can live on the reservation and raise her daughter in that community. And Charles agrees to go along with it. But as time has passed, he has become more and more obsessed with having his daughter find out who he is and what his side of the family brings to her life. He also has a very troubled relationship with his mother, who seems to be suffering maybe from dementia or early like Alzheimer's type disease. He's got this friend that he's gotten close with who is an alcoholic. Charles is a recovering alcoholic. He goes to AA meetings. And so Charles has a lot of issues. Charles has a lot of issues, but he also is like not a person to like be very introspective about his life. So he's a frustrating character because he doesn't interrogate himself or his own choices. He just sort of is very passive and lets things happen to him. And so he's telling us this story and all these things are happening. And it's like, he never takes control of anything. He never makes decisions to like, change the course of what's happening in his life. And so it's very frustrating. I think that he's a very realistic character, but maybe a very frustrating one. And what this book is talking about is, relationships, those that you create and those that you wish you hadn't let go of, what it means to be part of a community, what it means to be indigenous, and to what does the blood quantum have to do with all of that, whether you're indigenous or not indigenous. And Talty is really exploring that idea of what it means to be indigenous, and is it really the blood quantum that is the decisive factor in whether or not you're indigenous. So I thought that was really well done. Just really lovely descriptions, as always, from Talty of the Maine landscape and that particular part of Maine around the Penobscot River. I thought really well done. So glad I read that one. And then the next book I read was a science fiction novel, A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. This is book number 2 in the Scanlan science fiction series. And in this one, alien invaders have sort of started attacking parts of this empire out in space, and the empire, the Scanlan empire, like doesn't know what to do with this alien force because they can't communicate with them. They don't speak the same languages. There's no sort of common denominator to the communication styles between the two species, and there's a lot of internal politics going on with the military personnel in this Scanlan empire, and so there's politics happening and different people trying to become, more to gain power, to grasp power. And into the mix of all this comes the main characters from the first book, a barbarian ambassador from a space station and her handler, basically, from the empire. And can these two break the communication barrier and stop the war before it really gets started and save lives? And it was good, but I thought that the plot of the story didn't always hold together. There was a lot of things that were sort of glossed over without explanation because the author didn't really know how to explain them, and some things that sort of just happened because they needed to happen. So I didn't think that the plot of the story like always entirely held together, and the end of the book was maybe not exactly what I would have hoped it to be. It was enjoyable enough while I was reading it, but it won't be a favorite, and I probably I don't know if I'd continue on if there's another book that comes out or not. I don't know. The first book was good. This book was not quite as good, and probably not something that I feel I need to continue on with. I did buddy read that with Britta Bowler as well. So, because we had read the first one together. I then finished another reread, this time Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July. I buddy read this with my romance buddy readers, Doris and Katie again. I had only read Sense and Sensibility one time before this, and I did enjoy this book. I always forget how humorous Austen's characters are. My favorite Austen is Pride and Prejudice, and then Persuasion. But Sense and Sensibility is one of the middle books for me. It's not one that I dislike, and it's not the best, so it's kind of in the middle. And I guess I would stand with that. Review. This is very much in the same vein as Pride and Prejudice, and a couple young ladies. Their father dies, so it's just them and their mother, and they have to depend on the largesse of their relatives. And of course, everything hinges on whether they can make good marriages or not in order to maintain their lifestyle. And then plot ensues, and there are always funny side characters that are really Jane Austen, like, pointing out all the flaws in the society that she lives in. So yeah, enjoyed my time with that. And then last but not least, I finished book 3 in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. I picked this up when I was in New York City to read on the train coming home, and then finished the rest of it on audiobook. Couple, again, more long driving days for work, and was able to finish this up on audiobook. I did not like this one as well as I liked book 2. I really enjoyed book 2. Like, book 1 was okay. Book 2, I really, really enjoyed. This one was good, but I think it's too long. Like, let me just show you. This is book 1, Court of Thorns and Roses. See the size of that? Now we've got book 3. I think the author is getting a little carried away with the story, and there was a lot in the middle here that felt like filler, that I felt didn't need to happen. This is all the different factions basically go to war in this book. And the war scenes were like too long, just too long. I really enjoy the sort of found family aspect of this series. And our main character, Feyre, and the people that she sort of gathers around her as her family, I enjoy. I don't like her biological family as much, although they play quite a big role in this book. And they're all right, but they're not my favorite either. So yeah, I'm going to continue on because I feel like I'm invested in these characters at this point. But this book definitely went down a notch for me from where I stood after book 2. So yeah, that's, I should say this is romantasy, or like fantasy with a lot of romance in it. And yeah, they're fun. They're fun to read. They're good summertime books and great escapist fiction. So that's what I read over June and July. I hope to be back in a more reasonable fashion to talk about what I read in August. But life intrudes sometimes, and I don't get around to making videos as much as I'd like to. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.